If 2020 was the year the health crisis tumbled the economy, 2021 is the year of stressed supply chains, widespread shortages, and rampant inflation. Most of the U.S. industries are still feeling the cascading effect of global supply chain disruptions, rising commodity prices, soaring freight costs, a computer chip shortage, and now an acute labor shortage is threatening to hold back the economic recovery for much longer than expected. From cyberattacks to extreme weather to panic buying, our supply chains have experienced one major challenge after the other. But while inventories have been at all-time lows, pent-up demand and skyrocketing container prices are pushing consumer prices to sky highs. That's why you should start stocking up on food supplies right now, because experts are alerting that prices are about to explode. According to Aaron Taratzis, the Director of Economic Research at Convoy, a digital freight network, the longer supply transportation problems persist, the higher prices will go. He says, to make a very simple analogy, because of everything that's going on, demand and supply side, the freight market is almost like a stretched rubber band at this point, and any little disruption really reverberates throughout the entire system, he said. Economists have been warning that grocers will have no hesitation about passing on those increased costs to consumers. In fact, it's a common practice for grocery chains to raise prices much more than necessary to cover their own costs and to widen their profit margins, as explained by Bert Flakinger, the managing director of retail consultancy, the Strategic Resource Group. Inflation is the greatest gift the supermarket sector could get. They have not had these inflation benefits in years. Stores will mark up the full rate of inflation plus a little bit more, Flakinger told CNN. This means that grocery stores are not only passing on the bill of rising commodity and freight prices to shoppers, but also testing their limits to see how much they can send prices up before demand starts cooling and they effectively start losing money. If this narrative sounds familiar, it's because that's exactly the same thing happening to the housing and the stock market. Price bubbles are emerging all across the economy, and it seems that they'll only continue to grow until they reach unsustainable levels. Those at the very bottom of the economic food chain will undoubtedly be the hardest hit by this crisis. Meanwhile, grocers are adopting methods such as Shrinkflation, in which they reduce the size of the packaging but charge the same price, so customers don't get alarmed about any price increases. They believe that sales rates will be maintained at somewhat normal levels, since consumers won't mind or notice the higher costs because they need to buy groceries anyway, and buying food from a store is still much cheaper alternative than eating out. In fact, according to new data released by the Labor Department, the cost of food at a restaurant is rising at a rate even higher than at a store. Grocery chains, including Albertsons and Kroger, have recently revealed that they do expect to benefit from the rising costs, even though profit margins won't be as large as they used to be at the beginning of the health crisis, when no one was able to eat out and grocers managed to turbocharge prices amid waves of panic buying. Our business operates the best when inflation is about 3 to 4%, Kroger CEO Rodney McMullen said on an earnings call with analysts reported by CNN. A little bit of inflation is always good in our business, he said. Consumer prices for food increased by 2.2% in May compared to the same time in 2020. The price of pork, seafood, fruits, vegetables, and milk all jumped between 1.9% and 9%. Higher milk prices and a shortage of other ingredients and supplies are affecting even Starbucks, making it hard for consumers to get their favorite drink. In the company's app, the first thing you see is a pop-up that reads, "Sorry for the inconvenience. Some items are temporarily unavailable." Just like many other chains, the company is having to remove some products from the menu because prices are just too high to turn a profit. But that's just one sign of how deep this crisis is getting, supply chain problems are affecting almost every industry, from Starbucks to cars, to pretty much every sector you can think of, and adding transportation issues to product shortages and soaring demand, the result is very painful inflation for American consumers. It's just kinda crazy. We're just trying to get back to normal from the health crisis, but we're still far from that, said Forrest Evans, a worker based in Seattle. He said in an interview he's been looking for a second-hand car, finding that the starting price is around $15,000. They're 100% more expensive than last year, he outlined. At this point, the production of new vehicles is still interrupted by a global shortage of semiconductors and other raw material shortages, driving the price of used cars to levels not seen in almost a decade. According to Bill Keogh, the managing director of the Supply Chain Transportation and Logistics Master's Program at the University of Washington, major manufacturers around the world have been announcing price hikes ranging from 2 to 10%. The problem is even more worrying when it comes to food products for obvious reasons. Everybody needs to eat to survive. But not everyone will be able to handle such steep price increases with their limited food budgets. That's one of the many devastating effects of the crisis, as if millions of Americans weren't already struggling to make ends meet. With each passing month, the cost of essential supplies is only getting more and more expensive. Keogh said that with shipping costs having increased tenfold, from approximately $1,000 to $10,000, and a labor shortage contributing to delaying the delivery of millions of products, the future includes more shortages, explosive prices, and a lot of inflation in the economy. As food prices continue to surge, beef and pork have been leading the rise. Pork prices jumped 2.6% in the month of April and 4.8% from a year ago, and that's adjusting for seasonality, with beef and veal prices going up by 3.3% from a year ago, and that's according to data released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis on Friday. After a cyberattack shut down one of the biggest meat processing plants in the U.S., the decline in meat production dropped to the lowest level recorded since 1996, according to Grow Intelligence, an agriculture data platform. Bill Bullard, the chief executive of RCalf USA, an association for independent cattle producers, said that although consumers are paying record prices for beef, and yet cattle producers are receiving prices comparable to a decade ago, many of them are at the verge of going broke. With record high prices, the market is generating unprecedented profits for the four main meat packers: JBS, Tyson, Cargill, and National Beef Packing Company, Marfrig, which together control 85% of the fed cattle market. But small American ranchers, they're not benefiting. The main problem with relying mainly on big food companies is that they are highly reliant on exports, and once a single disruption happens, many other imbalances follow. And since meat and pork production has been dwindling since last year and stockpiles in cold storages have significantly shrunk, meat shortages might get a whole lot worse this summer, as demand has already increased 7.7% this year, according to Steve Mayer, an economist with Partners for Production Agriculture. He says a part of it is government stimulus payments. There's been cash in people's pockets even though some of them weren't working, and so that has been a positive for demand in general. Jonathan Gold, the Vice President for Supply Chain and Customs Policy at the organization, highlights that even though there's no shortage of demand from consumers, there continues to be shortages of labor, equipment, and shipping capacity to meet that demand. Supply chain disruptions, port congestion, and rising shipping costs will continue to be challenges through the end of the year, he forecasted. Among commodities, higher than expected demand from home builders and remodelers for materials such as lumber caused all kinds of distortions and supply issues over the past 12 months. while retailers are running out of a wide range of products from bicycles to hot tubs, and most notably, since they weigh so heavily in retail sales, new and used vehicles, this mess is still showing up on inventories. A recent report released by the Census Bureau exposed that inventories at retailers, from grocery stores to new and used vehicle dealers, plunged to $602 billion in April, marking the lowest inventory sales ratio in the history of data going back to 1992. And if you think things might improve throughout the year and inventories might get restocked, according to meteorologists, an above-average hurricane season is likely to worsen U.S. supply chain woes this year. Paul Walsh, the global director of enterprise weather strategy for IBM, argues that supply chains are going to be a major concern as we get deeper into hurricane season. I think one big uncertainty, and potentially a risk factor, is what the state of the supply chains will be as we get into the end of summer, because the hurricane season doesn't really start ramping up until the second half of August, and it peaks in September, Walsh said in an interview. The 2021 Atlantic hurricane season, which began on June the 1st, is going to be more active than average, and that's according to the weather company. Todd Crawford, chief meteorologist at the weather company, says there will be at least 19 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes in the outlook. However, as Convoy's Taratsas pointed out, hurricanes won't be the only disasters that will affect supply lines this summer. He says, "We're obviously watching all kinds of weather. It's not just hurricane season, it's also shaping up to be a pretty active western drought and wildfire season. Basically, the western half of the United States is in severe drought at this point already," he said. "We've already seen at least 2 big act of God events, as lawyers call them, this year. The winter storms in February, then the pipeline disruptions. So that comes on top of an already very tight freight market. Supply chains are stretched thin because of the outbreak, because of commodity shortages, not just lumber, but steel, aluminum, semiconductors, and because of the consumer spending spree that we've been on for 10 months now," he added. "Sadly, that's what happens when the government spends trillions of borrowed dollars to boost demand from all sides without considering the consequences. Supply chains are long and complex. Although there's money pursuing products, supply cannot simply materialize, and the imbalances created by these policies are only intensifying this crisis. For that reason, the best way to fight against such catastrophic shortages and insane price hikes is to prepare in advance for potential disruptions, especially when natural disasters are looming. The sooner you get your bottled water and your canned food needs in your garage or in your basement, you're going to be prepared for whenever it strikes and put less stress on supply chains through last-minute shopping," Taratsas concluded. "So get your emergency supplies ready before a threat arises, and of course, before they become too expensive. We should be prepared for the perfect storm that's coming, because once it hits, there's gonna be a mad rush all over the country."